Whether you live right next to the ocean or perhaps a river like the Thames, no doubt you know the impact of tides, right? And how we have high tide and low tide and how important they are, and that actually we can't just have the one without the other. And for me, it's a lovely analogy for work and the pace of life. You know, when life is full and flowing and there's high tide, um, we can be in full productive work mode. However, when we go to low tide, we may not always do that. So, personally, I experienced that. The last almost 3 weeks have been, I forced an incredibly high tide. I guess, I had to. There were a lot of deliverables, a lot of things came together at the same time. However, now I can feel how much my body's craving the low tide. And if we keep fighting against that and we force high tide, we can create imbalances, right? I mean, too much high tide can cause flooding and damage, erosion. So, my question, I have two questions for you. And the first one, which is one I've had to ask myself, is do you value low tide as much as you do high tide? And perhaps you do, or perhaps as a bit of an overachiever or a workaholic, or as so many of us are, perhaps almost caught up, dare I say, addicted to the pace of life that we find ourselves in, that it can be really hard to pull ourselves out of that fast flowing stream. And something that happens in low tide, if you think of rivers and shorelines, like when I lived in southwest London and I'd walk along by Putney Bridge and the river there, I'd see how in low tide you'd see so many things that you'd never noticed before, like bicycles and boxes and what looked like broken pottery and all kinds of things. So as the tide goes out, it can reveal things that we don't see when there's high tide. So low tide can, yes, look messy and muddy, and things can come up. And that's perhaps also what makes it difficult. Or perhaps you've noticed when you do spend time in low tide, when you do choose to slow down, to settle, to perhaps stop outside of sleep, where you spend time in stillness and solitude without constant stimulation, that maybe some things come up that aren't always comfortable, that may feel messy. In which case, I spoke about this in the Wellbeing Immersion, one of the talks, the Japanese art form of kintsugi, where when things are broken, the pieces that are put back together with gold are actually perceived as more valuable than the initial item that wasn't broken. So in our brokenness, in those pieces, in those parts of us that get revealed, it can be very difficult and vulnerable. And so have you got people that you can speak to? You can reach out to me. If you're not reaching out to me, do you have somebody that you could reach out to? And if you're feeling like you're really stuck in a low tide for too long and that you're struggling to come up to the high tide, definitely reach out and speak to someone. And perhaps small things, we live in extraordinary times, so they take extraordinary measures, can help. I remember 2 years ago when we could still go out and meet one another, I went to an event with a group of friends. And as a gift, I gave everybody a little personal message and put it into a bottle. And I thought it was such a simple gift. It was quite easy for me to do, yet many of the people told me for months afterwards that they kept the little message in the bottle and it made them feel good. So what about you? If we go back to watching the low tide and the high tide, if you imagine that you were walking along a shoreline, and you were to find a bottle that was written for you. So not a distress bottle, not a SOS, but rather, the lore of some messages in bottles can be quite poetic in nature and inspiring, as mine were intended to be. What would your message in a bottle be for yourself? And maybe when you're feeling a high tide and positive and upbeat, you could write yourself a note for those moments when you're feeling a bit low that you could look at. I've got one such message on the side on my notice board. And if you're feeling like this is not something that you need, is there somebody that you suspect may be having a bit of a low tide or feeling a bit stuck in the messiness and muddiness of it all? Could you write them a few kind, inspiring, authentic words that could lift their spirit? Because collectively, when we help one another and we rise the tide, we're able to lift all the boats, so to speak. So I hope that this reminder of how the natural cycles in nature are there to help us, and myself included, that you remember not to force too many high tides, and that when you have a low tide, if you're feeling a bit stuck, that you've got messages around to help you or people that you can reach out to. And know that I'd be honored if I was one of the people that you did reach out to. If I can't help, I certainly will do my best to find someone who can. Until then, may your tides be beautifully balanced and replenish you.